Good day, everyone. For all those who have already pulled for Yai, hopefully your pulls went well. Mine went about as normal as expected. But whether you have already pulled for her, or still undecided on whether or not to pull for her, today we're going to be taking a pretty in-depth look at all of Guji Yai's abilities, going through all the things I have noticed from the testings I have done. And then we'll talk a little bit about Raiden at the end as well. Because a question some people might have about getting Yai Miko is less that they necessarily feel that they want to get Yai Miko specifically, but rather they're wondering if they should get Yai Miko because they have Raiden. Now getting into the probably lesser part of her kit, her normal and charge attacks. For the normal attacks, there's not a tremendous amount interesting to say here. They definitely look very nice, especially for catalyst attacks. And they do function quite a bit differently from other Catalyst normal attacks, where other Catalyst characters tend to attack a single enemy, and usually has some sort of projectile or just some sort of effect that just occurs on the enemy as long as they're within range. Yai Miko instead, however, summons one or two Fox Spirits, dealing AoE damage in front of her. This means that, unlike other Catalyst characters, she can't really be used as a ranged attacker, as her range is a little bit closer to melee than other bows or Catalyst characters. But, because they do have AoE, does mean that she's a little bit better in that regard than other Catalyst characters. Her charge attack has the usual high scaling for Catalyst characters with the also incredibly high stamina cost, but unlike characters like Ningguang or Klee or Yanfei, who either have some sort of stamina reduction or just straight up remove the stamina cost of the charge attacks, Yai does not, signifying that you're really not intended to be charge attacking on her, or really normal attacking for that matter either. However, if you have some time and stamina, you can of course throw out some charge attacks for some extra damage. The interesting thing about her charge attack, however, is that if the enemy is large enough, her charge attack can actually do its damage twice. Now, the enemies do actually have to have a very large hitbox for this. Even Geovishap's are actually too small for this to occur on. At least I was unable to get it to occur. So for the most part, this is only going to be something applicable to large boss type enemies. Hence the Yai the Giant Killer. Now, with that having been said, Yai's kit, once again, does not really revolve around her normal and charge attacks whatsoever, which is definitely a shame, but instead revolves around her elemental skill and her burst. Coming to her elemental skill first, her elemental skill will shift Yai's position and leave behind a totem which will do damage to a single enemy periodically. Yai can have 3 of these totems out at once, has 3 charges, and as they have a duration of 14 seconds, but the ability has a 4-second cooldown, Yai has absolutely no trouble keeping these out the majority of the time. Now there's quite a lot to unpack with this elemental skill, the first being the position shifting itself. The trailer might have led you to believe that the elemental skill has some sort of iframes, however, it does not appear to. As you can see from these archers, if you dash through these arrows, you are able to just not take any damage. However, if you attempt to use Yai Miko's elemental skill through them, you will still take damage. However, if you use the elemental skill to move out of the attack's range, then you won't take damage, rather obviously, because you are no longer there. So, this is something in which you can use as a repositioning tool to get yourself out of the area of an attack, but you cannot use it to iframe through attacks. A bit of a shame, as being able to use it as an iframe so that you could use that stamina for either other characters or to charge attack more on Yai Miko definitely would have been kind of cool. And it's still cool that at the very least you can use it as a movement / repositioning tool, but still would have been a little bit nicer if it actually had even just a bit of iframes. Now for the damage portion, there is some incredibly slight AoE to this ability. It doesn't really matter because it can't even hit 2 closely grouped Hilichurls. And so Yai Miko's elemental skill should be considered a single target ability. The frequency the elemental skill itself deals seems to be about once a second per totem, and since you can have 3 totems out and should have 3 totems out the vast majority of the time, means you're roughly dealing a lightning strike once a second. So to that degree, it is very similar to Fischl's Oz. One major difference, however, is that Yai Miko's elemental skill does not snapshot. Now, these totems also seem to have the kind of normal ICD. If you have a single totem out, it will apply Electro every hit, so once every 3 seconds. However, if you throw out 3 totems, this doesn't actually change. It will still continue to apply Electro once every 3 seconds, likely because it is following the normal 3-hit rule, or once every 2.5 seconds. Interestingly, her particle generations with her elemental skill also works basically the same way. If you have a single totem out, it will generate an electro particle every strike, so once every 3 seconds, and if you have 3 totems out, it will do the same, and generate you a single electro particle once every 3 seconds. That means Yae Miko's energy generation isn't terrible, but at the same time, it isn't great either, as it means once every 9 seconds, she generates 3 electro particles for herself, whereas another character who kind of wants a battery, specifically Kamisato Ayaka, generates 4 to 5 cryo particles with a 10-second cooldown skill. The next thing to note are the levels of the totem. If the totems are close enough to each other, they will increase the damage in which they deal, as shown in the skill attributes page. However, this effect is not, so to say, commutative. If, say, the first and third are close enough to be connected to the second, but not close enough to be connected to each other, they will only be at level 2, and only the one connected to both will be at level 3. So you want to avoid putting these abilities in a simple line. So you will want to form some kind of triangle. Now, it doesn't actually necessarily have to be an ordinary looking triangle. You can still use it to traverse forward. You just need to put a bit of an angle into your path, and then they will still manage to connect. As for the range of these totems, they don't hit incredibly far away, but they still do have a pretty decent range. In terms of how much damage this ability will actually do, if we take a look at the level 3 tooltip at level 6, we can see that it's about 132 damage, and since with all 3 out, we shall expect an average of a lightning strike per second, we will be expecting to do 132% a second. If we compare this to Fischl, whose is level 9, and so if it was at level 6, would probably be slightly lower, but very similar to Yae Miko's, and also hits once every second. Yae Miko would deal somewhat similar damage to Oz. However, Yae Miko being a 5-star means that she will just have better stats generally, and so should probably be considered a little bit closer to Oz, plus the Undone by Sinful Hex ability if you only procced it once every about 3 seconds. And so, Yae Miko's elemental skill is probably roughly similar in terms of damage to a C0 Fischl. However, of course, we have yet to get into Yae Miko's ultimate. Yae Miko's ultimate will deal a single hit of damage, and then will destroy each totem currently out to deal an additional Tenko Thunderbolt damage for each. Now, the positioning of the totems for the Tenko Thunderbolts is completely irrelevant. As long as they are out and close enough to Yae, the Tenko Thunderbolts will always follow the initial hit. In terms of its damage output, once you were to get it to around level 10, you should expect this to deal something along the lines of about half the damage that Ayaka's ultimate does, as Ayaka at level 10 will deal roughly about 4,300 if you hit with all of the attacks, whereas Yae's at level 10, assuming a 28% increase, will deal roughly about 2,200. The ability does, however, have a 22-second cooldown and a 90 energy cost, despite Yae not having fantastic energy generation, which means even if you pair her with Raiden Shogun, she is still going to have some energy problems. Now, for a lot of the characters in the game, like let's say Zhang Ling, Xinqiu, or Beidou, for characters that have a high cost burst, this might not necessarily matter all that much, because that's generally speaking where the vast majority of their damage comes from. Sure, Beidou can hit pretty decently hard with her elemental skill, but it's nothing in comparison to the damage her ultimate can do. So giving her some energy recharge, and then slapping the Emblem of Fate set onto her is very, very good. With Yae Miko, however, her damage is more so split between her elemental skill and her burst, meaning that if you go that route, you are putting resources into a stat that does absolutely nothing for about half of your damage, at the sacrifice of stats that would. So you're probably going to want to try to figure out a way to give Yae Miko as little energy recharge as possible, but still manage to get her ultimate up off cooldown. Now, if you were to use Yae in a team without any other Electro characters, without any sort of battery at all, Yae Miko's energy recharge is a serious problem. It will take forever for her to get her ultimate back up. And if you do not have her ultimate to use, then she really isn't going to be doing any more damage than a C0 official, which and so leads to a bit of annoyance with her, where you don't want to give her energy recharge because it doesn't help her elemental skill at all, but you still need to somehow get her ultimate up with a 90 cost. So this means that if you're going to use Yae Miko, you pretty much need to pair her with either Raiden or Fischl to act as a battery. However, Raiden and Fischl themselves, Fischl and even Raiden will not be enough to consistently battery Yae Miko. As you can see here, with a Yae Miko of 130 energy recharge, which is fairly normal for a DPS character that needs their burst and that you're using a battery for, Yae Miko still has a bit of an issue managing to get her ultimate off cooldown. And so because of this, and the fact that she is a Catalyst user, meaning she just has electro damage on her normal charge attacks anyway, and so that's not really a concern. If you are using her alongside Raiden, I would use whatever time you do not need to be on any other characters on Yae, so that she can be gaining more energy by being the active character, and thus requiring you to put less energy recharge into her. And so it is still probably important to level her normal attack talent. In terms of her passives, her first passive is nice and a little bit annoying at the same time. Basically, this allows Yae Miko to continue to have pretty much full uptime on her Seisho Sakuras, even though her ultimate destroys them. As for each Seisho Sakura that is destroyed by her ultimate, will reset the cooldown for one charge of the Seisho Sakura. So if you have 3 out, use her ultimate, it will reset the cooldowns for all 3, and you'll be able to then throw out the 3 Seisho Sakura again. The reason I'd say I find this annoying is I do wonder why is this even the mechanic? If you destroy them and simply immediately re-throw them out again, that means your rotation is essentially use her elemental skill 3 times, use her burst, and then use her elemental skill 3 times again. And her elemental skill, when you cast it, doesn't do any damage. So frankly, I'm just not sure why this is even a thing. It seems like it'd make a lot more sense for her ultimate to deal Tenko Thunderbolts for each Seisho Sakura that is out, and then just leave them there, as this just adds pointless time to your rotation. Her second passive is perhaps even more baffling, as it is an increase to her elemental skill damage, only her elemental skill damage, based on her elemental mastery. Now, because she has elemental mastery scaling, this does not at all mean that you should scale Yae into elemental mastery. Even the elemental skill itself will benefit more from attack percentage and crit rate and crit damage and damage bonuses than it does with elemental mastery. So this passive is only useful if you're going to use something like Sucrose, who just gives elemental mastery out instead of it being something you actually try to build into. And as she's Electro, there's not much reason to be building her into elemental mastery for that either, and her normal attacks and her burst do not benefit from this passive whatsoever. Once again, a rather baffling passive. But hey, at least Sucrose's elemental mastery that she gives out is a bit better. With that out of the way, let's briefly talk a little bit about Raiden. Because one thing you might be wondering is, if I have Raiden, should I get Yae? Because Raiden, outside of Hypercarry Raiden, which is only particularly good if you have her C2+, you can of course still do a Hypercarry Raiden if you're below that, but she is going to be simply worse than doing a Hypercarry team for a raw damage character, which makes sense because she's not a raw damage character, she's also a battery. But aside from that, any team that you would put Raiden in doesn't need Raiden in. Raiden National, for example, is a great team for Raiden, but the national team doesn't need Raiden. It can do just as well, sometimes even better, with other characters. Another commonly used team with Raiden is Raiden and Eula. You know, that's a nice team, but at the same time, Eula does a very significant amount of normal attack damage. So replacing Raiden with just a different Electro character who will instead deal more off-field damage can work just as well, if not potentially better. So because of that, even though there are definitely teams that you can use Raiden in and that will be good in, those teams don't actually need Raiden in there to be good. And so because of this, you might be thinking, okay, so is Yae the character that I'm supposed to get in order to pair with Raiden to make a really good Raiden team? And so, to answer this question, what I intended to do was go through the first half of floor 12 with Raiden National, and then do it with Raiden Yai. I suppose we could call that team Yay. And see how they compare. However, unfortunately for today, I simply won't have time for that, and so we'll do so tomorrow and put that video out there, probably without commentary, so that you can see for yourself and make your own determination of whether or not it's worth getting Yai, or if you should save those Primo Gems for another character. And so, with that, I think we have reached the end of the video for today. As I said, tomorrow I shall go through the first half of the Spiral Abyss with a Raiden Shogun team, and then with a Yay Hypercarry team, along with Sucrose and Bennett, to hopefully help you make the decision on whether or not you want to get Yai for your A. And as usual, thank you all for watching. Let me know what you think about Yai if you have already pulled for her, and I hope you all have a great day.